Hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, I really appreciate you stopping by. This is a bonus video for the week because the subject matter is a little heavy-hitting. Visually, we have the remaining speed paint of my illustration deterioration, but verbally I'll be discussing the intentions of the piece and why I created it because it's in my line of chronic illness representation. And I want to talk about the full cathartic process, why I made the decisions that I made, and kind of just provide a artist statement because I really feel like those are important when I make these types of pieces. So most of the art I make it simply because I want to, and I think it's cute, it's pretty, it makes me happy, and other things of that nature and manner. I do, however, always try to have one cathartic, more vent style art piece on the back burner while I work on more fun stuff. So this is one of those. I tend to work on these for a longer period of time, usually a month or two, and just express something a little bit more difficult about life and living, which for me is always tied to being chronically ill and having chronic pain and poor health overall. So generally I only make a couple of these a year, but they're very cathartic for me and I take a lot of time with them. However, the actual discussion can bring up a lot of subject matter that people might be a bit more sensitive to. I know I personally have a really hard time listening to other chronically ill people talk about this sort of stuff. So visually on screen, I will be putting up a list of things that will be talked about in this video. So if you want to step away, you can. I'm going to have a normal Thursday video out, of course, so it's not like you're missing out on any content for me from the week. So my themes will be hopelessness in regards to life expectancy, loss of quality of life, discussions of debilitating pain, the imposter syndrome of being human with a chronic illness, and feeling like you're losing pieces of yourself to illness, which generally speaking does kind of just summarize the entire piece in general. However, I do want to talk about why I made the decisions I made and a bit more of the visual aspect of it. So let's get into that. I titled this piece Deterioration because the primary purpose of it visually for me was to display the process of and the sensation of feeling like like I'm becoming less of myself and losing myself to my illness. The feeling that my life is, in a sense, slipping away from me because my body is slipping away from me. And as my health has grown worse over the years and I have failed to find a treatment plan that has worked for me and my pain has gotten worse, it has become more difficult to live life without the slight sensation or idea that perhaps I am in a way deteriorating. And so I've gone through this process of learning to settle into the process that my body is going through and, in a sense, accepting it. I have an entire piece called Acceptance that is the sister piece to this one, and it is about the process of accepting a disability and a chronic illness enough to be able to live your life to the fullest and not let it hinder your ability to enjoy life. And in order to do that, I found that making pieces about the parts of my illness that tend to make me feel less fulfilled in life, which for me is often this feeling like I'm losing myself, losing my mobility, losing what health I do have, illustrating it and putting it onto paper and, in a sense, venting my frustrations and my negative feelings around it has been very beneficial to the process of being able to enjoy my life as it is and do things like art. I think when it first started to get particularly bad, when I was in my preteens and I really started to notice it, I went through a pretty severe depression of trying to grapple with it, and I found that grappling with it just isn't as effective as accepting it, and it's through art that I've really found the ability to do that and sort of get my feelings out there in a way that is safe and productive. So that's generally why I titled this piece that, and I wanted it to visually, even to people who don't want to listen to this full story, I wanted it to visually convey some sort of loss of the self. I wanted it to be clear that regardless of if they have this background knowledge, the person illustrated clearly isn't entirely there. They are, in a sense, also deteriorating. And I wanted it to be literal, concise, clear from the beginning, really, overall. I think, but I also don't know for certain, but I think that it's a common enough experience that people who have chronic illnesses, in a sense, feel a bit like they're deteriorating, at least in the initial part where we can be in the situation, or we have to be in the situation where we're working on trying to find a treatment plan or a diagnosis that allows us to manage ourselves in a way that is beneficial or at least stabilizing ourselves. I don't know necessarily when I will get the opportunity to have a treatment plan that makes me feel like I'm not deteriorating anymore, and I don't know when that will happen. And I am still kind of in this middle ground where I have accepted where I'm at, but I also have optimism at the very least for a future where I can be a little bit more managed, and this sense of deterioration might be gone. And so for the actual illustration process, I was mostly just trying to convey enough with the line art alone and the particles that I did include to give the sense of deterioration while holding off on the glitch effect that I intended to utilize at the very end. So overall, I did spend a fair bit of time with it looking very different from how I intended it to look in the ultimate end. And I spent most of my time rendering the skin and clothes, mostly because it was the only thing I really felt like I had to work on. The glitch effect is something that just kind of is so done by the program, and it didn't feel right with the concept I was working on to not really take my time with it and not spend a lot of time on the things that I could work on rendering. And maybe I spent way more time than I needed to, but it was still cathartic, and I still found the process to be beneficial for me overall. So when it came to the decision-making process on the body and the clothing design, I did want to, in a sense, kind of draw in, or at least go through a little bit of catharsis. Don't mind the dog if you can hear him. He's a bit of a heavy breather, but I did want to go through the catharsis and the kind of, I wanted to draw in and kind of represent the ways in which chronic illness and disability tends to be romanticized, and how in the movies and the media, people like me are supposed to be a romantic presentation for the heartache at the end of it. We're put into storylines predominantly so that we can die at the end or magically get cured. And our arc is about being chronically ill. It's about not being normal, I suppose you could say. We die at the end because we were a love interest and it's devastating, or we never get better and we're forgotten, or magic comes and saves the day and wow, you can walk again. Your migraines are gone. You're all of a sudden perfectly fine. And I guess I wanted to kind of touch on that while also bringing in a bit more of how it's not necessarily how people, I suppose, in a sense, in the media like to watch us suffer, and how we're meant to suffer beautifully and be attractive in our suffering. For the frills and the dainty that in a sense, kind of are indicative of how the body kind of feels throughout the process. At least for me, I feel dainty, and at times I feel more inherently feminine than I otherwise would want to or need to, because there is something feminine in society, the society that I was raised in fragility and dependency. And I, in a sense, wanted to drape my depiction of deterioration in that femininity and that fragility, that beautiful and the desirable. And that fragility and daintiness, I do kind of feel can be associated with or drawn in with the process of falling apart. We are fragile in a sense, and we can become quite dainty throughout this process. And so I did want to touch on that as well. It was not as intensely thought about as some of the other components. I in a sense have also disregarded femininity, or don't particularly feel entitled to it over the years, because femininity is a, oddly enough, difficult thing to obtain and exhibit. I abandoned long hair years ago because it's not only hard to manage and it hurts to manage, yet I do believe and agree with when people say that hair holds memories. Mine certainly did. So not only for hygiene, but for the sake of mental well-being, I had to get rid of it, and I needed it gone, and I can't fathom ever growing it out again. And in a sense, I abandoned what at the time in my early teens felt like an indicator of my femininity, and adopted a form of self-expression that felt well more authentic, pulled me further away from femininity, despite me not necessarily caring in the first place whether or not I presented one way or another. So I did want to at least a little bit touch on that femininity, that kind of daintiness, the stereotype of daintiness, fragility, softness, dependency. I wanted to at least have a little bit of that in there. And when it came to a lot of the rest of the piece beyond the initial line art, when it came to the actual coloring and the environmental decisions that I made, I was overall kind of going with the flow of it. The background was originally going to be a brighter color. I wanted originally to exhibit a sense of optimism in the piece, and the idea that there might be a brighter side overall, that there might be perhaps it's a dark before the dawn sort of situation. However, I ultimately didn't feel it authentic to myself in my experience, or the actual feeling of deterioration, because despite the fact that I have accepted it, and I kind of don't mind it at this point, it's just kind of something that's happening, and I go with the flow of it. I feel it how I feel it, and I move on with my life. I don't think the actual process of deteriorating and the feelings of it when you haven't, I suppose, come to terms with it is not positive. And more important, the way in which you deteriorate, or I have deteriorated, or the ways in which that I have lost some of my abilities over the years has been nothing positive and nothing optimistic for me. And so I had to go with a black background or a darker background. I did add a bit of a blue gradient just to add a little bit more brightness to it, but I wanted it to more so be indicative of the isolation and the loneliness that comes with these bodily sensations. Over the years, particularly by my mid-teens, my early mid-teens, friends, I had stopped spending time with me because I couldn't participate in the things that they wanted to do. I couldn't go hiking. I can't do certain things for health reasons overall. And so I watched, in a sense, as a lot of people I valued kind of separated themselves from me, stopped inviting me to things. And I then additionally have found myself in a position where I'm scared of trying to participate now. Now that I'm old enough to drive, not that that is a recent development, I've been driving for 4 years, but I am old enough to drive. However, I can't trust myself to drive. I'm scared to drive, and thus I'm further terrified of trying to involve myself in activities that are less hard on me, such as a day at the park, because overall I am terrified of commuting because it's so painful to drive, and I've had accidents and situations where I have threatened my overall well-being additionally by driving. I'm in a situation now where I'm scared to visit my own partner because I don't know if I can trust myself to drive and to make it there safely. So it started as being left behind when my health wasn't great but not bad, has become self-isolating now that my health is worse, but I have the means to technically participate at times because I can't trust myself to be safe. I overall stopped driving for the most part almost altogether by 17 because I just don't feel safe driving far. I can do small commutes. I do small commutes, 15-20 minutes, but for the people that I wish to see or would like to see, those are multi-hour commutes, 1-2 hours. So I have, in a sense, gone from being abandoned to self-isolation because of this process. So, on top of the inability to feel safe driving, there's kind of the additional thing that I think a lot of spoonies, regardless of how you fit into the community, are kind of relate to, is the not really wanting to make plans because pain flares or difficulties managing fatigue, and just some days are just not good days. They're just worse than usual. And my pain flares are kind of not even flares anymore. It's just kind of, it'll feel like a flare one day and then it won't go away. And then it'll flare again, and that won't go away, and it feels like it never settles down. Though some days it hurts more. Turning the lights on and rolling over is so painful that I can't do it. I felt like additionally the darkness was a good association for this because I can't really turn the lights on anymore all the time. I mostly sit in dark rooms, low light situations, and it helps me to, I guess, feel a sense of normalcy. It helps mitigate my headaches and my migraines, and it didn't feel right more so to prevent optimism through brightness either, when the optimism for me tends to be more so in my ability to control the lighting and to put myself in dark rooms, dark situations where I can function a little bit more normally. And so it just felt right. I did originally, when deciding on the concept, want to have the body a little bit more turned away so I could mutilate the back more strongly, but I overall decided that I didn't want it to be particularly gruesome, and when it comes to how my back pain has been manifesting over the years, I do want to go more in a gore direction for it. I want it to be more visceral, so I chose a more slight frontal tilt, and I instead chose a more cartoonish or illustrative approach to the deterioration, the knees, the arm, the shoulders, more so that. And of course, with adding the glitch, it does overall end up taking away more from the body. The hand being mutilated was more so because that was the first part of my body that I really started to feel leave. But overall, I didn't want this piece to be graphic or explicit. At least not explicit in a way that felt visceral. And I wanted it to feel more associated with my piece Acceptance, which is currently my profile picture, YouTube here. So it's that one. I wanted it to have that level of ethereal and inhuman and a sense of peace to it. I wanted them to feel a little bit more appropriate together, I guess you could say. I don't suppose it was a particularly good decision to do this piece digitally for it, but I overall do like how it went. So I suppose additionally it's weird to say when you don't know how bad it'll get, how long you will live, when you'll find true physical peace or not, when you feel alone and you're hurting, to say that you want peace and you feel at peace in one sense or another. But ultimately there's an acceptance that needs to come with this to be able to feel fulfilled in life, to be able to sit down and create art and pursue passion, love, and relationships fully. If you can't accept where you're at, it's hard to open yourself up to giving yourself fully. And so in my pain, my fatigue, my migraines, my light sensitivity, and all that, I found a lot of peace in how my life is and where my life is at, and a neutrality at the very least in the expression, and that lack of strong emotion was something that I felt was needed additionally for authenticity, because I am not experiencing particularly strong joy in life or much happiness in my day-to-day. I am at a point of neutrality and acceptance where I am not in particularly a bad headspace or a bad way over where I'm at and how I'm feeling. Most of my joy comes from external little blips in time, things that are a bit abnormal within the day-to-day. I feel simply neutral. And I think that that's good enough for now. I do hope to find a point in life where I can feel happy, regardless of anything, or regardless of most things, despite how I feel. But overall, there was a great deal of catharsis that comes with this process, the process of admitting it, and admitting that I don't really feel alive in my body, and admitting that my body hurts to the point where I don't feel fully human anymore. And just sort of articulating to the void, and through artistic means, being able to say visually and verbally that this is how I feel and that this made me feel better to do, has been really different. The first time I ever got the opportunity to actually verbally express why my art looked the way it looked was for my peace acceptance. I submitted it quite passively for an assignment because I didn't want to work on 2 drawings at the same time. And I had to give a verbal artist statement, and it felt very freeing to be able to confess, in a sense, all of this. And so, regardless of how this video does, and regardless of anything else, being able to sit down alone, aside from the dog, and just speak it has been very helpful. And I can recommend that, not necessarily artistic expression if that's not what you're into, but for other spoonies, sitting down and truly articulating this and speaking to a voice. It's very helpful for me. Perhaps not for you, but I would recommend trying it if you feel up for it. It feels like a diary, I suppose, of a little audio diary, a blip in time. It'll be really interesting to look back on this video in a year or 2 for sure. So, overall for me, this process was very healing in a sense, and I'm grateful to further have the ability to express it and perhaps have other people find some sort of catharsis, or perhaps relatability, or further feel some sort of empathy for this experience. If you know anybody in your personal life, having it articulated might be helpful. I don't know. I don't know who will come across this and who will watch this, of course. But I appreciate everybody who sat through and allowed me to indulge in this intimate expression of my artistic intentions for a piece that otherwise very much could have been put up without any explanation and still been, I think, pretty good. So I appreciate it. If you have any thoughts, do let me know down below. I'm very interested in what people have to say about this, especially if they sat all the way through. And if you know anybody who might benefit from this from the ability to listen to somebody articulate these things, do share it with them, or inform them that there's stuff like this out there, and that perhaps they might be able to talk to a void one day and feel a little bit better. So, that is all for this video. If you have any questions, or if there's anything you'd like further elaboration on, do let me know. I'm always happy to talk about my artistic process and those things. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day or night wherever you are, and I appreciate any and all engagement you offer me and the time you put into watching this. So, best wishes. Goodbye.